Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in and welcome to another episode of the Dark Side of Flair competitions. Today I'm going to talk to you about a competition that I organized myself with another guy back in 2007 in Orlando, Florida. I think the competition was called Orlando Flair Open. I don't remember exactly. We had $5,000 in prizes and it was right after Quest for the Best Bartender in the World. So we were expecting a lot of people competing. But back in the day, it was not like it is right now. Back in the day, $5,000 in prizes, people would be like, I'm gonna go to the parks in Orlando instead of going to compete. You know, now you will have everybody competing for that kind of money. Anyways, so we organized this comp with this guy that at the time he was my roommate, or I was his roommate. I was living at his house. We put the competition together. We picked the trophies, make the rules. I was contacting everybody, the judges, the MC. I went and got the trophies. We had the comp, only 5 competitors. The competition between first and second, it was pretty tight. My brother won that competition. And then there were other 4 guys. So the time came, we had to give them the money, right? I go and talk to my partner and I was like, hey, we need the money now for the competitors. He's like, yeah. You know, like, let them enjoy the night and, you know, I'm gonna give them the money in a little bit. I was like, okay, you know, it makes sense. Usually it was like that, like, no problem. A little bit of time went by. A couple of people were like, hey, we're just gonna take off. You know, it was Quest for the Best, and then this one, we're you know, tired. You know, it's been a long week. Understandable. So I went back to him. I'm like, hey, they need the money. He's like, okay, let me go and get my secretary, and I go get the money. Cool. 5-10 minutes. Hey, we gotta go. I go back to him. I'm like, hey. He said, yeah, okay. I'm like, what's going on? You know, just no. Let me go get my checkbook. So he went, grabbed the checkbook, start signing the checks for everybody. What I didn't know is he was giving them the checks, but then in the back on the check, or like on the back, he wrote, don't cash this check until next Friday. I didn't see it. One of the competitors, he called me out and he's like, hey, what's going on with this? You know, this is what he wrote in the back. And I'm like, let me go ask. I went and asked him. He's like, well, you know, we're gonna get the money from the sponsors on Thursday, so I just want to make sure that we have the money. So I'm asking them, just please, you know, go on Friday to make sure that we really have the money. I'm like, okay, are you sure? He's like, yeah. So everybody that competed that day, the 5 people, they all knew me. You know, we've been friends for a while, so they were like, yeah, no problem. You know, it happens. You go to a competition, you get paid a few days later, no big deal. So that Friday, before the Friday, so after the competition, the next day, we decided to go to the parks in Orlando. We went to Universal and stuff. Again, I was his roommate. I was living in his house. We were all day out. When we went back to the house that night, the house was empty. And so I got scared. I'm like, did we get robbed? Like, it was literally empty. The only things that were there, and like everything, it was my stuff. Everything else, gone. I was like, weird. I tried to call him. He wouldn't answer. So obviously, by then, I was just, something obvious is going on. That Friday came by. They went to deposit the checks. the checks, they bounced. They called me. I tried to figure it out. I started talking to, he will never return my phone calls, so I started talking to his secretary. He used to have a magazine in Orlando, so I started talking to his secretary. What's going on? She was like, we were just waiting for the check, no big deal. They're gonna have the money. Please give me their information, phone numbers, address. We're gonna send the checks. Don't worry about it. I'm like, I am worried because he disappeared. I'm living in his house when he took everything away. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know, like, I'm confused. Time went by, they never got the check. He completely disappeared with the money and with a lot of things. I was very sorry because I put my name on the line. I talked to all the competitors and I was like, hey, I already paid myself. I went out of my money, pay the judges, the MC, excuse me, I paid for the trophies, but I was like, I'll pay you guys, they were all amazing with me, and they're like, hey, we don't want your money, we want his money. He had the money, he left with our money. We don't want your money. They were all 100% is like, don't you worry about it. Don't, like, and for what I know, like, they haven't said anything, and they were super cool, understandable, and they didn't want to take my money. I'm like, okay. Time went by. Remember, this was in October 2007. Time went by. A few years later, we had a competition in Puerto Rico. Small world. He moved to Puerto Rico. So for the after party, we went to this bar where he used to work. We didn't know, but because he knew that we were going for the after party, he called out that day, so we couldn't see him. Then we haven't heard anything for a while. Years later, there's a competition here in Las Vegas, Cajunaville, one of the Flair bars that we used to have, and he showed up. So one of the competitors from that night back in 2007, he saw him and he's like, what are you doing here? Well, I just want to do it. I want to do the right thing. And he's like, do you have the money? No, but I will have it soon. Just leave. We don't want anything. We don't want to get, in trouble. Just walk away right now, or things are going to end up pretty bad. So he ended up leaving. Years later, he saw my brother in Miami, and same thing. He's like, hey, I have the money, just give me your bank account information and I will send you the money. My brother called me, hey, I just saw this guy and he said he has the money, he wants my bank account information. I'm like, don't give it to him. There are other ways to get the money, but don't give him your information. So he texts him back. He's like, hey, I'm not gonna give you my information. Just send me a check. We meet up. Give me cash. Nothing. He disappeared again. And now, from back to 2007, from 2007 to now, 2020, during this quarantine, my brother called me. He's like, you're not gonna believe what happened. I was like, what happened? I just saw this guy. He called me. He's like, hey, let's meet up. My brother went, and the guy's like, hey, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do none of this. A lot of things happen in my life that I regret. I'm trying to do everything right. I'm trying to make everything right. So here's the check for $5,000. And can you please make sure that everybody else gets the money? my brother called me. He's like, told me the story. But he's like, I just deposited the check, so we'll see if it bounces. The check went through. He actually wanted to make it right after all this time. So my brother kept his money for first place, sent me the rest, and I ended up sending it to all the other 4 competitors, which it was actually, I feel, a blessing that after 13 years almost, this guy out of nowhere shows up and tries, to do the right thing and pay, pretty much it's good money, especially in this quarantine. So I couldn't believe it, and it was something bad that happened at a competition with a happy ending 13 years later. I wanted to tell you the story because it was my fault for not checking with him that he had the money. And it was one of, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, the first competition that I ever ran in the States. I used to organize comps in Argentina, but never here until then. So it was a big deal for me, and that happened. But it was a happy ending after all. Some other competitions, they actually ran away with the money. And there was a competition in Italy that I was invited. I never went, and the organizer left with $50,000. So even though this was a small comp comparing to that one, again, it was a big deal for me. It was a happy ending again, once again. But I wanted to tell you the story just so you know that I'm not only here to go and talk about everybody else. It was my experience. I had to deal with that. I appreciated every single competitor for supporting me, and I was actually super excited to hear that they got the money, even though it was 13 years later. Thank you very much for staying with me and listening to my story, and I'll see you next week with more The Dark Side of Flair competitions. Bye.